is it even the United States against North Korea? Because we're really fighting under the name of the UN. Because remember, when the war really starts, there are going to be some American troops in Korea to protect our ally, but most of the troops are going to come after they ask for help from the United Nations. Now, 90% of those troops are going to be Americans. So it's kind of in a weird spot where it's not us directly fighting the Russians. It's not even us directly fighting the North Koreans. This is a proxy war. We are involved in a very serious way, but for the first time, we're fighting against an idea. Now, I want to go back to where we started with the whole Cold War because we have one big overarching foreign policy. One thing that drives all the decisions we make. You remember, what's our foreign policy called throughout all the Cold War? It starts with C. Well, yes, sir. Containment. We have to contain communism. Keep it from spreading, and it will eventually destroy itself. Now, do we see how this is all but the perfect example of trying to contain communism from spreading? In this particular instance, we have to do it militarily. We have to send troops to keep communism from expanding. Now, when I saw you guys previously, we were talking about how when North Korea invades South Korea, they have a whole lot of early success. In fact, they're going to push those American and South Korean troops down to really the southeastern corner of the peninsula. It's right here where they ask for help. Now, the UN's going to approve troops. They're going to send 500,000 of them. But we got to be a little creative in how we go about doing this. Now, I just want to ask you guys again, do you remember? There's someone who's already in Asia, who's in charge.
Sorry.
We good? We done? Who's already in Asia? Who's going to be running this war for us? Who's different? MacArthur's already there. Now, MacArthur said, I can solve this problem real fast. What did MacArthur want to use? The atomic bomb. So here's MacArthur and Truman sitting down together, really arguing about how to go about doing this. And Truman just tells him, there is no way you're going to use the atomic bomb. This is where things get kind of weird because you have two guys literally sitting at a desk arguing about what the rules for using an atomic weapon are. MacArthur says, you put me in charge. I'm the general. This is on the table. I get to use it. And the president, the commander-in-chief says, remember, you work for me. I'm your boss, and I'm telling you you can't use it. We got to come up with another idea. Now, fortunately, MacArthur does come up with a pretty clever idea about landing it in Incheon. Now, when he lands here, what's the next step of the plan? Where does he want to go next? What was it? He wants to go across the peninsula. Now, we're going to pick up with this idea because, like I said, it's pretty clever. It's a good idea, but it's all about timing. You got to get across the peninsula as fast as you can. Because what we are planning on doing here is putting the North Korean invaders in a really difficult position. The idea is we're going to land at Incheon, race across the peninsula, and make the North Koreans that have invaded have to make a choice. If we can get to this landing and race across the peninsula, what advantage does that give us? How would that help by having all these troops race across the peninsula? What do we get out of it? Let me say it like this. Do we still have troops at the Pusan perimeter? If we have all these troops up here racing across the peninsula, is that a bad situation for North Korea? Sure. What we're basically setting up is a trap, where if we can get all the way across the peninsula, now those North Koreans that are in South Korea are trapped. They'd be fighting an enemy in the north, they'd be fighting an enemy in the south, they'd have for themselves, that's something we've discussed in the past. What do they have on their hands if they have enemies in the north and the south? It's two fronts. They're trapped. Now, like I say, the idea is really clever because MacArthur kind of understands something that maybe Kim Il-sung doesn't quite get. A lot of these members of the North Korean army don't want to be North Korean. They don't want to be stuck in the communist North Korea. They want to be in the democratic South Korea. So let me just kind of throw this at you. If you're a North Korean troop and you don't even want to be North Korean, what are you going to do when this trap is sprung? Thought I heard, what was it? Throw your weapons down and say, I don't want to be North Korean. Can I stay here? We're going to see about half of the North Korean army that's in South Korea just throw their weapons down and give up. The other half better move fast. The other half has a decision to make. If we can get across the peninsula, that other half that wants to be North Korean, if you're down in here, you can either, one, try to fight your way out. I don't think that would go well. Or two, run north. We're going to see about half of the North Korean army surrender. And the other half is going to turn around and run north before the trap is completed. We're going to see about half of them running back before the UN gets all the way across the peninsula. So we have lost, in just a handful of weeks really, about half of the North Korean army to surrender, the other half's on the move. Now this plan by MacArthur is pretty clever, because eventually we're going to get all the way across the peninsula. We have now just regained where we started. South Korea is liberated, and now again we control everything right about from the 38th parallel south. So let me ask you guys, has anything really moved? Are we back to where we started? Sure. So I'll go ahead and ask you guys, would it be perfectly acceptable at this point to just say, we did our job, we protected our ally, now North Korea, you just stay up there? What would be another option? What's the next possibility? What do you think? Max, what do you think? I think that's an excellent idea. An army's at its weakest when it's on the run. This is what's called when the rout continues. So when they're on the run, this is when the most damage is done. We're going to start pushing them back. That 38th parallel was the dividing line. We're going to regain that, and now we're going to start pushing north. We're basically going to take the idea that Stalin and Kim Il-sung had and simply flip it. We're going to reunite the peninsula, and we're going to do it by pushing the communists out of North Korea. We're going to reunite the peninsula under capitalism and democracy. We just got to push them back. What we're going to see for the next few months is we're going to push them up north, almost all the way to the border with China. Now, I do want to remind you guys, in 1949, China falls to communism. Does that make them a little nervous that the UN and the US is pushing north? What do you think might happen if we succeed and push all the way up to the border with China? What might happen next? Maybe we push on to China. The Chinese start to get a little bit nervous with all the success that the UN and the US is having. They start massing some troops along the border. Now, it's no real secret that the Chinese are getting a little bit nervous, that they're afraid that they might be next, that they're massing some troops. So Truman and MacArthur are going to have another sit down. When they meet, Truman kind of asks MacArthur, saying, well, what's the plan if the Chinese get involved? What are you thinking here? And MacArthur just tells him very straightforward. He goes, well, first off, I don't even think the Chinese will get involved. I think the percentage of them getting involved is pretty slim. But if they do, not a problem. Atomic bomb. How do you think Truman takes this? He kind of looks at him again. He says, I told you. We're not using the atomic bomb. It's not negotiable. It's off the table. And they kind of fall back into this first discussion they had. And MacArthur says, it's a weapon. I'm the general. It's on the table. I get to make this choice. And Truman finally he's sick of him. And Truman says, no, you don't. Because you're fired. MacArthur stands up from the table and balls up his fists, and he's getting ready to punch the president. This is where we stand in 1950 because the president won't let him use the atomic bomb. Now, it's kind of unclear exactly what happens because really it just sort of stops at that point. MacArthur leaves, he's been fired, and now you have this weird little scenario. The person who's been in charge of the entire war is now gone. But the war's almost over. If you can just complete this and push north, then the war comes to a very nice end. The Chinese are not going to make things that simple. As we keep going north, China's getting very, very nervous. Now, China's going to be led by a man named Mao Zedong. Now, I'll just go ahead and ask you guys, because maybe you remember this, maybe you don't. Do you remember last week when we played trivia, and I told you how many people Stalin was responsible for murdering? Remember what Stalin's number was? About 40 million. Mao Zedong is probably responsible for about 60 million people dead. He is one of the biggest monsters in all of world history. And during this time, Mao Zedong is getting nervous. So he makes a move that's a gamble. What he says, this is almost a quote where he says, I would much rather fight in North Korea than in China. So unleash the army. 300,000 Chinese troops come pouring across the border. 300,000 Chinese troops are simply led across the Yalu River that divides the border between North Korea and China. They start pushing the UN and the US back. Because numbers like that, it's hard to even kind of figure the logistics of it. Those are just huge numbers. The Americans, the UN, don't really have much of an option. You got to start falling back. We do have one option, though. What could we do? We can always use the atomic bomb. It's kind of funny because right when this happens, MacArthur's going to be on really one of the first televised interviews, and he just kind of sits there and he goes, I told you it'd come to this. I told you the atomic bomb's going to have to be used. Don't you miss me already? Now let me just go ahead and ask. Who is probably backing up China? The Soviet Union. By 1949, what does the Soviet Union have? The atomic bomb. So what happens if we use the atomic bomb? They use it on us. We blow up the world together. So now we have this situation where 300,000 plus Chinese troops push us backwards. The atomic bomb is off the table. And really, that would be the only thing to really even things out. We're going to have to do what should have been done. Fall back. We're going to fall back all the way to right about the 38th parallel. Right where this got started. It's at this point where you have this very odd thing take place. Joseph Stalin. Of all people, Joseph Stalin says, we need to have peace. We need to talk this out. I don't want war. I want peace. Now let's kind of think through this a little bit. Knowing what we know about Stalin, does he really care about peace? Does he really care about anything? Just power. Why on earth would all of a sudden Joseph Stalin, this monster, say, I want peace? How is he trying to look? Heard a couple things. What was it? What was it? Like the problem solver. I think that's a good way of saying it. Because you have to kind of think of this in terms of you're either with us or against us. If Stalin wants to be the peacemaker, what does the U.S. look like? The ones that are going to be inciting this war. So you have Joseph Stalin saying,